Next was Antonia, 4 feet something. Her daughter came up nearly to her chin. In appearance and demeanor, as well as height, she could almost have been a schoolgirl. Her smile was it the fullness of her upcurved lips, bearing her imperfect teeth without apparent shame, or the way that her eye corners so plausibly echoed it? Her smile almost misled me into imagining that there was someone who had not yet learned what it was like to suffer. For what it is worth, the fixer, just then interpreting, who had pronounced her Spanish to be indigenously accented, further volunteered that she was, quote, extremely uneducated. Why should she have been any different? Her hair was neatly parted across the top of her head. How many people in your family? I began. Quote, me, my daughter, and my husband. Close quote. Not surprisingly, perhaps thanks to ice, the child feared me. Quote, why did your husband stay behind in Ecuador? Quote, he didn't want to come, she replied. Were you disappointed? Si, she said readily. You will stay together with him, or is it like divorce now? We're together the same, close quote. Can you tell us about your journey? Quote, it was beautiful, she said. I must admit to not expecting that. Quote, tell us some of the things that happened. Quote, in Mexico City, we went to the pyramids, saw the Virgin of Guadalupe and Coyoacan. There was a really big, pretty church, close quote. Once again, she reminded me of an schoolgirl to whom nothing bad, schoolgirl to whom nothing bad had happened. Therefore, I must have been the ingenuous one who could not read her. Did anything bad or scary happen? Quote, no fear, she replied with a big smile. It was just a really pretty journey, close quote. Do you have an ankle bracelet? Yes, she said. Of course, it resembled Samuel's. From a distance, it could have been some kind of watch. She asked what it was for. Could no one have told her? Then inquired, quote, when I get to Baltimore, will I be able to work wearing this or not? Close quote. I don't know, said the fixer. Why Baltimore? I asked. Because my sister works there. There she was, by the way. And her ankle bracelet. I asked her where she had crossed and what had happened. She answered, quote, in Nogales. We came across the border outside of town in the desert. There was a wall, and we walked a little bit further, and then the police came. They took us in a car, and they took all our clothes and our backpacks and brought us to a little building, close quote. And once again, just as with Samuel, I tried and failed to imagine her experience. Where in the desert had it been? Where along this lonesome border with the weird, lonely ocotillos grasping darkly at nothing and shadowed saguaros that in that scaleless desert could have been her size or the height of the Washington Monument? Then far away mountains beautifully clear, and between her, her child, and them, glowing, narrow, pool like mysteries that might have been real water or maybe mirages, and somewhere, maybe in sight, detention, rescue, or death. Since from Ecuador across Mexico to Arizona is a pretty long way, had she not perceived what to look out for, wouldn't she have died? And what had it been like when Northside's official hand fell heavily on her shoulder? Suppose that her first tongue was, as it might well have been, a Native American one. As Rachel Wilson reminded me, quote, it's a particularly bad problem for indigenous people because no one on the border speaks their language. Indigenous people usually speak a little Spanish, so the cogs in the American legal system, they think they understand everything. They're entitled to an interpreter in court, but they have to ask for it. But if you have to ask for it in your native language and they don't understand your native language, close quote. The fact that Antonia had been ignorant of the ankle bracelet's purpose had been troubling, if not outright diagnostic. So I went back to the beginning. I asked her, what made you decide to leave Ecuador? Quote, I worked in the fields with the cows and animals only to eat and buy clothes, nothing more. My husband worked building houses, and sometimes there was work, and sometimes there wasn't work, sometimes no food, close quote. The daughter was 8. How was it for her coming across? Quote, when we got to immigration, she was afraid and she cried, close quote. Did you cross with or without a coyote? Without a coyote. How did you know which way to go? Quote, there's just little roads, they said. There will be a wall, look for the wall, just keep going north, and you'll find the wall. We got to the big wall and weren't able to cross it, so we walked further away and had to walk, close quote. How many people were you when you crossed? Just the 2 of us. That's a quote. Again, I sensed a disinclination to recount the actual border trespass. As for what happened in custody, as with Samuel and his son, both detainees preferred to pass over it. Quote, you've heard about the freezer? Close quote, asked Rachel Wilson. I said, no. Quote, the first place migrants are detained is called the freezer. People's fingers will turn blue. There are instances where children have diarrhea and are throwing up and have no clean clothes. Then they're moved into the so-called dog cages where they have mylar blankets. At least they're not sleeping on bare concrete. Here in Arizona, at least, they're not in the dog pound part, close quote. Why is the freezer so cold? Quote, we can't get a straight answer from the CBP. The ACLU has been trying to find out, close quote. Footnote here. This might explain why no interviewee mentioned to me these wonderful accommodations. And a second footnote. Here we go. Another email from the CBP. Quote, CBP facilities provide for the security, safety, and well-being of those in our custody and are maintained in accordance with applicable laws and policies. These facilities are designed to be short-term in nature and to house individuals until they can be processed, turned over to another agency, or repatriated, close quote, CBP said in an email. Neither Samuel nor Antonia mentioned the freezer. Every other detainee I interviewed did. In this shelter was a binder of handwritten migrant stories and facing page translations. Here is what a girl named Maybeck wrote on November 16th of last year, 2018, November 16th. Quote, we came in buses and enclosed trucks in which we couldn't breathe. After they left us in the desert, after 6 hours, their immigration arrested us, and it took us to a hidden house, and it was very cold. They took our sweaters. Afterward, they asked for our data, close quote. Then came another hidden house where they were kept for 3 days, then a church called Alversa, then another church. Maybeck ended, quote, my dreams are to learn English and go to school and pursue a career, close quote. Many entries were sunnier, such as this one. Quote, my name is Alex. First, thank God for all he has done on our trip since we left on the 4th of the month. We were 7 days in immigration, and on this day they brought us to the church where we can see the world and hope God will bless you always, close quote. Why not? Those people numbered among the lucky. Because they all had sponsors, their detentions were brief, as were their stays at Diane's shelter. Most stories I would hear were less pleasant. In other words, border protection works in wondrous ways. Part 4, the mafias. Let's save that for a separate section, shall we? I agree.